Hi, William here. The question for today is, should the U.S. move to a $15 per hour federal minimum wage? Now, my position on this one is no, it should not. Now, I want to be clear in what I'm saying here. I do believe that the federal minimum wage needs to increase. It's just the $15 thing that I have a problem with. Now, a little bit of history. The fight for 15, as it's called, I believe started about 8 years ago. It came around again in 2016, or at least you heard a lot about it, because of Bernie Sanders with his presidential run. And then now Joe Biden has been inaugurated and it's come back in the public consciousness anyway. Now, some states and cities in particular, regions and states, have already adopted a $15 per hour minimum wage or are on the way to doing it. Also, some retail chain stores have as well. Fast food, as you probably heard, is the main focus for these arguments. And that's basically because the percentage of the workforce that this affects is larger than others. And therefore, they are disproportionately affected by it. That rings true for retail workers as well. So the minimum wage is currently set at $7.25 federally. And that was done in 2009. Now, there is a separate minimum wage, a federal one, that includes tips, but I'm going to ignore that for now. Now, like I said, this was like 11 years ago that this $7.25 was set. And honestly, it seems like we're due for an increase, whether it's increase for inflation or cost of living. But the question is, back in 2009, was that $7.25 adequate? And I think the answer is clearly no. No matter how you look at it, how you do the math, that amount just does not compare to historical values. So if you account for the cost of living increase that I mentioned before, the difference in inflation increase over the years, or if you take into account also worker productivity, none of this is going to get you to the amounts that we have now. It's just way too low. But the question is, should we go to $15? So we first have to decide what the purpose is of the minimum wage. It seems to other people, it's common belief, that the point of a minimum wage is to serve at the very least as a living wage. Now, a living wage is exactly what it sounds like. It's what you would need to earn in order to enjoy some basic standard of living in your area. The living wage and the minimum wage are known as a type of price floor for labor. And a price floor is something that you would typically set above the market price, the equilibrium price, for some other purpose. In this case, it's to get people out of poverty, obviously. Now, we can argue the merits of even having a minimum wage or living wage at all. But that money is going to exist somewhere, right? So it's a matter of who's paying for it, who's getting it, and the proportion thereof. Do we want more profit for the investors? Do we want higher prices for consumers, lower prices for consumers? Or does it go to the employees? It's some ratio, but I tend to favor demand side economics. This is also known as the trickle up effect, as opposed to the trickle down effect that we heard so much about in the 1980s. That's a whole other discussion. But the idea is that up to a point, money in the pockets of the poorest people in your society go right back to the local economy. And that's true. Whereas money given to rich investors does not in general. Now, this probably sounds like another type of redistribution of wealth, and it is. But this is one that keeps people above the poverty line, and it stimulates the economy, if that's what we're interested in. Now, of course, this formula for figuring out what the amount would be for this minimum living wage is going to change based on geography and culture, etc. Because we have to think about a different geography, different culture might have a different idea of what a need is. And ultimately, it may seem arbitrary, this formula that we're enacting. But we don't want to fall prey to a continuum fallacy where, because we don't know exactly where an inflection point exists, we just say it doesn't exist. We just have to accept that there is a range, and we'll try to get as close to the value as we can, reasonably. So what are the other main arguments against raising minimum wage in general? Costs would increase. This is the infamous $38 burrito that I saw on Twitter. And this price impact, hypothetically, would be worse on smaller businesses because the payroll is, as a percentage, is much higher. This is true. But the economy would also benefit, as I said before, talking about demand side economics. So which benefit is higher? It depends on the business in the area. And remember, when we're looking at this, we want to look at the net effect on the economy, not one subsector. And it's important to realize that in practical terms, just how little these price increases would be, like how much is passed on to the customer if that's the way you're going to do it, they end up being tiny. I don't know if you saw any of these studies that were done where they actually did the math, but they end up like being pennies on a burger type of thing. So we're talking small amounts. Another one is job loss or companies going out of business. Now for this, we actually have a lot of data on this. There's been a bunch of studies, but the results are all over the board. It depends on where you are. It depends on the business and that. There are a few large studies that showed no job losses in fast food sector as the wages increased. And there are studies that do show job losses. But again, remember that this is only one part of the equation, and we have to look at the overall effect on the local economy as to figure out where to apply it, where it makes sense. And that is essentially what it's central to what my conclusion is. The other one that I wanted to bring up, just even though it's kind of silly, is this argument of, well, if we're going to do $15 per hour, why don't we do $500 per hour? But even though the 15 really seems arbitrary, it's not, right? You know that the $15 is at least closer to the wages we just talked about, whether it's a living wage or it's the old one, but adjusted by inflation or cost of living increase, or the worker productivity that I had mentioned before. Now, another one is, would inflation increase by increasing the wage? And the answer is, yeah, it would. But of course, you can't reject something just because one effect in your analysis goes the wrong way. That's the whole point of doing a cost-benefit analysis. You have to look at it in its totality. So I want to go back to the beginning and basically just ask the question again. Should we go to a $15 per hour minimum wage? Again, I say no, because the problem is that we know it's not the right number for everywhere. We do know that it needs to be increased, and we know we need to get on it as soon as possible, but we need to apply a fair formula to account for the various costs of living in the US. Now, you could make the argument that we should just go for it, get it done, and then kind of fix it later because we know we're going in the right direction. But honestly, that just seems like a really bad idea because it's going to be hard to take it back later on, that's for sure. And then you know that, again, you know you went in with the wrong number. So why don't you just do it right the first time? Now, of course, many states have already done this, and I see this as the ultimate solution anyway. As long as we keep the federal minimum wage at a reasonable number as well, just because some states will tend to lag behind, and we got to have a minimum there for everybody. So let me know what you think. Please like and subscribe. Be kind, be safe, and I'll talk to you later. Thanks.